Harry Potter for any aging millennial was more than just a set of books or movies. It kickstarted a rabid culture that we all found ourselves caught in. I'm sure there are those of you that are younger, considered to be Gen Z or maybe even Gen Alpha, and many of you might have strong opinions, positive or negative, about the world of Harry Potter. But for a moment, I want to stress the significance of living through the Wizarding World's global dominance. Midnight releases and lengthy waits between books, lines out the door for Barnes & Noble and Borders bookstore, RIP, as well as a huge celebrity status for a couple of kids that would define the franchise's movies and our collective consciousness every time we read the words Harry, Ron, and Hermione. There have been a few other fantasy franchises that have reached a similar fan base, but I genuinely do not believe that any of them matched up to the fever dream that was Harry Potter, especially during that time. One of the lesser rabid parts of the property were the video games. The early ones basically being nostalgic catnip for those of us who owned a Windows 98 or 2000 home PC. For what it's worth, as a kid, those games fucking ruled, alright? Sorcerer's Stone in particular lives rent-free in my head with two specific things. The spell Flipendo, but also one particular quest line that involved sneaking around Filch, which legitimately terrified me at the time. At the end of the day though, they were basically collectathon adventure games with a campaign that wasn't anything special or different from other games at the time. If you ever played Spyro or Super Mario 64, or any other kind of action-adventure game of that era, this one felt no different. As time went on, some of the games had some nicer polish and were pretty fun on the GameCube, specifically Prisoner of Azkaban and Goblet of Fire. However, no amount of novelty could really shake the games loose from being beholden to the book's plotlines. You basically just played what you read or what you saw in the movies more or less, albeit a few changes. I unfortunately have nothing to say about any of the games past Order of the Phoenix because I never played them, but it was at this stage the games took a significant backseat. It felt like a check being cashed writing off the name of the IP, not a legitimate chance being taken on creating a game that was fun and exciting for its own sake. But now you enter Hogwarts Legacy, developed by Avalanche Software, a studio that no one really knew up until now. At least I certainly didn't. And yet with every live reveal stream that they had about the game, it seemed to be promising the world. However, all of it was overshadowed by the turf lady herself. Now, I have no dog in the fight against J.K. Rowling, but I do not like her, because she literally cannot stop herself from chiming in when everyone, both haters and non-haters, just want her to shut the f up for literally 2 seconds. It feels like a lifetime ago, but I almost want to say that the actual development of the game had no issues until Rowling opened her mouth nonstop. Anytime the flames started to smolder, she'd kick the f***ing fireplace again and fan the flames over what? An ego? To wound? I won't get into my personal thoughts on trans rights or trans people, but no matter who you are, what you look like, or what you believe, I will always give you the time of day until you devolve into an in-your-face piece of shit. The problem is the internet algorithm of every social media site, this one included, turning our feeds into echo chambers, preventing us from behaving like actual f***ing human beings the moment that we decide we don't agree on a subject. Diving into Hogwarts Legacy felt like stepping into a digital war zone where logic and empathy often got blasted to bits. You had folks on one side popping off because touching the game was apparently just as bad as endorsing all of J.K. Rowling's controversial takes. Then there were those on the flip side, using the game's buzz and hype to poke at the already bruised trans community as if the whole situation was some twisted game. Taking a community that is already down and kicking them in the teeth just to what, rub it in their face? I felt lost and stuck watching this dumpster fire and thinking, could we all just stop? It wasn't just about a game anymore. It was about how ridiculously polarized and downright nasty online chatter can get, and the poor devs, man, stuck in the middle of it all. Case in point was the discourse around Sirona. The team behind Hogwarts Legacy tries to do one thing decent by including a transgender character, a move that you would think Rowling herself would have vetoed in a heartbeat, right? But nope, the internet decides to fixate on the Sir and Sirona, missing the forest for the trees and diving headfirst into outrage mode. It was a solid attempt at inclusivity turned into a circus show because it's Twitter, it's the internet, it's the comments section, and f***ing Reddit and 4chan, and just damn it all to hell. Now you take all this and my work became a nightmare too at the time. Covering Hogwarts Legacy was just too big a deal to just skip over at GameSpot, but talking about it felt like tiptoeing through a minefield. We ended up playing it down the middle, with disclaimers everywhere and letting our trans colleague Jessie Earl share a very insightful and impassioned take in an op-ed. It wasn't really about taking sides, but opening up a space for some genuine insight amidst all the noise. Honestly, it was probably the most level-headed thing to come out of the whole mess, and if you ever want to dip your toes back into the Discourse for whatever reason, it is a must-read. The most ironic thing was as soon as the game came out, it fell off not long after. Not among the people who actually gave a shit about the game itself, but from those who never had any intention of playing to begin with, either for or against Hogwarts Legacy. Some sites gave it great scores, we gave it a middle-of-the-road score, and the eye of the game's world shifted immediately away towards releases like the RE4 remake, Tears of the Kingdom, SF6, BG3, and dozens of other games, and what would become one of the best years for video games as a product in a very long time. So here we are now, a full year later, the waters are still, and it's 2024, and I'm staring at the code of Hogwarts Legacy that I had gotten a year earlier but barely touched. Just another game in my backlog that I wanted to break, and turns out, waiting was the right choice. Hogwarts Legacy is a game that I had to purge from my brain so I wouldn't go into it biased or resentful, and thankfully going in with a clear head made the experience feel honest. There was so much to love and some things that were head scratching, but all in all, I was fascinated and quickly sank in over 60 hours by the time that I had finished the main story campaign. Walking out of the common room and seeing labyrinth pathways and halls, staircases and secrets, students buzzing by, and the poltergeist himself bursting out of the walls or grinding downstairs. Tapping your wand against any sort of interactive environment, or seeing the things around you burst to life with magic, sometimes humorously, and other times far more subtle. There's enough in Hogwarts alone to trigger anyone's curiosity enough where you find yourself running endlessly through the castle before reminding yourself there are actual quest lines you should probably follow. Gradually progressing through the story doesn't only let you delve even deeper in accessing areas that were previously locked off to you, but it opens up the game to a map much larger and denser than I imagined. There's so much content at first. So much that it is overwhelming and incredible, especially when compared to anything a game about the Wizarding World in the past had offered. The rest of the world lets you flex your magical prowess as you go through the conventional RPG quirks and unlocks. From spells to strength to usable inventory items and material farming or crafting, every element is established in a way that almost always feels appropriate in this world of magic. Caring for magical beasts and making sure they are fed or groomed will net you their fur or some other element that can be used for upgrading items. Literal health potions and temporary ability boosts are crafted in the potion stations, with the materials needed for these grown by using recipes and skills acquired through herbology. It's a clever and creative synergetic economy of material farming that almost every RPG would have, but it ties it directly into the world of Hogwarts in a way that does not feel arbitrary. Resources are grown, gathered, synthesized, or just simply bought from any number of ways, and when all the wheels are turning, the satisfaction is immense. All of this comes to an absolute peak when you unlock the Room of Requirement partway through the story. The space becomes your hub during downtime between quests and can almost always be accessed at any time, allowing you to customize your space and aesthetic in a myriad of ways. This is where the vivariums unlock, which will be where you keep magical beasts you capture, but it also allows even more customization, many of which are rewards from side quests, giving you an incentive to stray off the beaten path in the pursuit of a nicer and more personalized space. Additionally, you can keep your herbology pots and potion tables here, letting you always stay stocked up on what you need before you embark on the next quest. The room was one of the coolest parts of the game's customization, and I spent several thousands of galleons trying to make sure that I had all the recipes unlocked to maximize my crafting in it. The collectathon DNA of past Harry Potter games were very much shown here too, and it embraced the OG games in a way that lit my heart up with nostalgia. Revelia, one of the first spells you learn from the game, becomes a trademark, and it is impossible to not spam it, hoping to hear that faint ding indicating a field page was nearby to collect. So these things weren't necessarily there to push the story forward or to help you unlock certain quests. Some of it was, but a lot of it was just there for the sake of being there. And it was a mixed bag. Some of it feels arbitrary, some of it just feels fun to collect. Field pages basically felt like these Birdie Bots beans of the OG, but the collectathon nature didn't end there, as plenty of side quests will still have you chasing down enchanted keys, popping balloons, receiving torn pages of a book, and acquiring enchanted statues meant to terrify the caretaker. Whether or not you're interested in these, their placement throughout the game felt organic and natural both in and out of Hogwarts, although of course completionists will have to push themselves to get them all, Not just because some of the harder to find ones are spaced further out across the map, but the sheer number of these, particularly the field pages, feel endless. I mentioned balloons, which remind me that my favorite part of the game was something I didn't think they could pull off as well as they did. Flying in Hogwarts Legacy. Absolute delight. Particularly broom flying. Full stop. The moment I acquired my first broom, I tried seeing how far and wide I could travel with it, and my jaw absolutely dropped. There was almost no limit. Of course, there are some invisible walls and boundaries. You can't fly indoors or in Hogsmeade, and some mountainous peaks require you to take detours instead of going in a straight line to your next marked objective. However, it is just a joy to do. The unupgraded broom might not feel as fun, it can feel limiting, but the fully upgraded broom is an all-time experience and one of my favorite things to do in the game. Despite a very generous fast travel system involving flue powder, yet another creative universe tie into a game mechanic, I found myself preferring to fly from point to point, taking steep dives and gliding around the castle and countryside. Hogwarts Legacy also lets you do things that almost no other Harry Potter game lets you do, like using the unforgivable curses, and overall having an extreme arsenal at your disposal. Integrating plants like the venomous Tentacula or Mandrake in combat, strengthening your resolve with the Maxima potion while juggling up to 12 spells at any given time, battling spiders, inferi, poachers, trolls, beasts, and everything in between feels simultaneously overwhelming and cathartic. It's a true love letter to every wannabe witch and wizard that cried when they didn't get their Hogwarts letter when they turned 11. The lack of surface level limitations at first glance encourages you to want to branch out in a natural way. There's so much content that the excitement of being able to create a wizarding mind canon for your character had me over the edge, dreaming of all the possibilities. When the momentum picked up, I found myself embracing fully everything Hogwarts Legacy offered me. Here I was, 30 years old, grown-ass man, suddenly in Ravenclaw robes, wondering what else there was that I could do. Now, the rose-tinted lenses took me far in the game, but unfortunately, almost everything crumbles apart if you go beyond the surface and start to pick apart and dissect any number of the elements of the game I mentioned earlier. We're a full year out from Hogwarts Legacy, which means that another game has come out since then, and unfortunately for Hogwarts, that game is called Baldur's Gate 3. Now, despite having not played it yet, but having seen a good chunk and definitely having heard a lot about it, both from colleagues and friends and the internet alike, Baldur's Gate 3's existence highlights a brutal stark divide between what Hogwarts manages to offer and how deep a game can actually go. Hogwarts is basically the light version of Baldur's Gate 3. There's an illusion of choice in your dialogue options, but almost no significant change for the vast majority of the game. Yes, there are, I believe, 3 different endings, but the gameplay mechanic of having dialogue choices in other RPG games usually have more clear and concise measurement metrics, letting you roleplay as an objectively good or bad character with lasting consequences. I say consequences because Hogwarts Legacy almost has no consequences, which in particular instances is confusing. With the exception of very particular do or die type moments, almost always involving Sebastian's questline, the only meaningful day-to-day change is basically extorting NPCs to pay you for doing whatever it is they wanted you to do, and or giving a few insults in, which I'm all for. But it's rare for the people around you to actually treat you differently, or more importantly, to unlock different quest options or dialogue choices based on how you behaved up until that point. With the exception of learning the unforgivable curses, the vast majority of the game continues to exist as if it's business as usual, regardless of what you do or how you do it. Then there's the aspect of limitations and immersion-breaking moments. I don't fault the game significantly for this, because I'm considering the devs and the insurmountable task that they had getting a game like this to even work in the first place. But despite my bias, I cannot deny the fact remains that for every wonderful step that was taken forward, just as often there was a step or two back. A few examples. I'm so thankful we had flying, but that just made the absence of Quidditch all the more brutal and painful to deal with. I can't expect everything, I know, but I also can't stress just how badly I need a Quidditch PvP or PvE mode at some point in the future. There was also lockpicking, something that felt interesting at first, but it quickly felt silly and neither challenging or fun. Even the upgrade trees felt odd and unbalanced. Certain trees like Stealth and the Room of Requirement felt very weak compared to the awesome power offered by the Dark Arts or the basic spells tree. And even then, as I mentioned earlier, with the lack of consequences, there was almost no reason to avoid the Dark Arts or to pour your talent unlocks into anything other than core combat. Speaking of spells, although I very much appreciate and enjoy the dozens of spells ranging across different groupings based on an easy to understand color scheme, there were not enough spell slots at the end of the day, even after upgrading all the spell trees. Infuriatingly, many of these spells were not needed for combat, but for doing things like puzzles, stealth, navigation, even taking care of creatures. This meant at a moment's notice when the environment turned hostile, you had to break the immersion and go back to your menu to reslot the spells you needed. It's head-scratching, especially when considering essential spells like Revelio or Protego were given their own keybinds. There's no reason why there couldn't have been an extra group or two of spell slots dedicated only to these other spells that were non-combat, but not necessarily essential either. Speaking of head-scratching decisions, the gear system was confusing. Not the system itself, that part was obvious, but the why behind it had me at a loss. I suppose it helps with the nature of having a level check, so to speak, especially if the game wants to keep exploration and the open nature of its world at the core, and I can get behind that. And thankfully, transmog is easy and helps ease the pain of always having to swap out gear. But that's the other thing, the sheer amount of gear that you have that falls in your lap makes any desire to upgrade the loot obsolete. In fact, I literally did not upgrade a single piece of gear until the final boss, just so I could have a reason to use the dozen of beast materials I had crafted in the interim. It's things like this, from the upgrade trees to the weird side games like lockpicking or the Merlin trials. It feels like the vast majority of these were part of some modern day RPG checklist the studio took and decided to just shove together. I have to commend them for at the very least making them as relevant as possible in the Hogwarts universe, so you're not really wondering why you're doing a lot of these things. For the most part, they all feel relevant to your magical learning, but as time goes on, many of these side gigs are just exhausting, even if they're only optional. Almost every issue I've mentioned so far is redeemable or forgivable, and I can look past it thanks to all the excellent lore and life in the rest of the game. However, the main thing that genuinely hinders the game to the point where I was no longer enjoying my time were stretches of the main campaign and their quests. I don't dislike that you can't be a student and just play the Hogwarts version of a game like Bully, but I do not care for the whole Keeper storyline. And in particular, I do not give a shit about Professor Fig. He is insufferable and becomes the source of my ire as being the main figure that just grinds my exploration and joy of adventure in Hogwarts to a complete halt. I found far more enjoyment in doing quest lines for my fellow classmates. Sebastian and Poppy, they had some of my favorite quests throughout the whole game. And when compared to the main campaign, their quest lines brought me far more joy. Sebastian's story felt the most hefty with ties to dark magic, and even the modern Harry Potter story by involving a member of the Gaunts. And in a rare moment for the game, decisions made during his quests did result in shifts to the tone and story that felt far more authentic than the rest of the game to me. Poppy's story was also excellent, but more so in the battles and the areas that you got to explore with her, tied to the magical beast and her history with poachers, which pulled at my heartstrings from sadness to moments of awe-inspiring beauty. Then you have the main campaign, the whole Keeper story. And it was okay at first, it was interesting, particularly the pensive memories and the idea of this ancient magic, but very, very quickly it became a chore. I did thankfully enjoy some parts of the main quest line from an aesthetic point of view, and I did not mind other parts of the puzzle platforming and the trials themselves. Those trials had a healthy smattering of looting, spellcasting, and discovery as well. But so many of the dialogue cutscenes and exposition is just so damn boring. Another disappointing element of the main quest were the lack of letting you participate in the actual classes. With the exception of one or two classes like an early herbology lesson with mandrakes, and a later astronomy one asking you to match constellations, almost all classes are depicted through non-dialogue cutscenes, and then just learning a spell or two. I'm suspicious that there was more here, but it might have been left on the cutting room floor. Then there's a missed opportunity of house competitions. Not only is Quidditch gone, but there's no way to fight for house glory by the end of the year. It's just gifted to you. Teachers are giving and taking points in dialogues, but who's actually counting? I would have liked to see more consequences resulting in house points. Maybe being a good student could net you a certain number of points, while being a maverick or a bad student would dock you some or net you a lesser amount of points if the end result was still productive. I don't know, man. I'm not a developer, and I know these things are easier said than done, but the absence of it was striking. I know I'm complaining a lot, but I really did feel elation when the flow state hit me with this game, and the crash down to earth from time to time was just disappointing, because I wanted so much more. But as I always say, it is what it is. There's something I am wary about in the future, specifically the sequel. I have little faith in Warner Brothers. They seem to be fucking up a lot of things from their handling of the DCEU to their video game properties and trying to shoehorn in the latest trends over prioritizing the game as its own cohesive self. In short, they're money grubbers that would throw in AI and ChatGPT written lines in a heartbeat if they could. Recent news mentioned that the sequel to Hogwarts Legacy was going to try to turn it into a live service game, which I believe Avalanche would be able to pull off if they play their cards right. But I don't believe at all it is a game they actually want to make. If Hogwarts Legacy tries to be a shared world game that prioritizes monetization, all that's going to happen is we're going to get another live service clone with stupid emotes and premium skins so you can show them off while doing the gritty or whatever in the Great Hall. And if they go that route, I fear the soul of what makes Hogwarts Legacy good will wither away. The problem with live service is it is almost always unsustainable. It is constantly tinkered by people in suits who don't know what they're doing or don't care for the minutia of what goes into making these games. And it cannibalizes game content in favor of a premium store that is either pay to win or is purely cosmetic, but still diverts valuable development sources away from making the game good, in favor of making a game that makes money beyond its release. It is troubling that WB took a long look at Suicide Squad's lackluster release and they said, let's try it again. But once again, I digress. Regardless of my issues or complaining, this is still without a doubt the most liveliest take on Hogwarts I have ever seen, and ever expect to see, to be honest. Hogwarts Legacy is truly a passionate love letter to the fans from the devs in a way where they really tried to fit so much into this game, and for the most part, they were very successful in doing so. Sure, some of it was shoehorned in arbitrarily, but so much of it not only felt natural, but excitingly, it felt appropriate in matching the logic of this universe. The highs of Hogwarts Legacy are true, genuine highs, amplified exponentially by fans of Harry Potter. Yes, of course, from a game's perspective, there are better RPG choices out there, especially recently, but I'm not really worried about those comparisons because Hogwarts does stand on its own merits in a way that feels good. There were fewer games recently that I had this much fun exploring through, and sure, not all of it was roses and daffodils, and yeah, there were some honking flowers at the low points, but man, there were absolutely some daylilies here and there too, and for me, those are some of my favorite flowers. Until next time.